webinar, if you would like to call, on this whole series, which is all related to crisis management. So how to react in times of crisis. Very relevant nowadays, obviously, but look at it as crisis in general. First of all, I would like to tell you that whatever I tell you here today is just mostly my interpretation, so you don't have to agree with every single thing that I have to say, but I would obviously like you to have like an open mind whenever I'm telling these things. I took the topic of 21st century skills and made an adaptation to it to see how they are very relevant to the startup life, and to also analyze how these skills can sort of prepare you for times of crisis or uncertainty or anxiety. But let's just begin. So let me begin by telling you a story about a little boy who was the son of a doctor and a wholesale store manager, who was always told that the most important thing was to get straight A's in school, to have perfect grades, to really push for it and really push himself to get those really good grades. And so he did throughout elementary school, got really good grades pretty much all the time. And then along came, same boy, grew up, went to high school. And then it so happened that that boy still kept on getting really good grades, kept on being in academic excellence. But then at some point in high school, he flunked his first exam. He failed his an exam for the very first time, and came to the realization like, whoa, what's up? How do I deal with this issue? How is this going to affect my overall grades? How am I going to try to like make up for these points? And then along came on the same boy onto university, still on the same mindset that school is the most important thing. So while you're at university, you should really focus on your studies, on your classes. There's no need for you to work to accumulate any job experience, because while being in university, your main priority should be studying, right? So along came the same boy when went on then to get his first job, and sadly realized that he had not much relevant experience, and that he felt quite lost during the very first weeks, the very first months. And that is kind of my story in a very few sentences. So very obsessed with academics and not really taking the best out of school. So the thing with schools, the thing with universities is that they really focus on academic excellence, which is not wrong as such. Schools really give you the tools to excel in your field. So if you're, for instance, a coder, they will teach you the right coding languages, the right frameworks. If you're a telecommunications engineer, they will teach you the newest and most relevant technologies. If you're a designer, they will teach you what the latest trends are. If you're an accountant, they will probably show you the trades of the business, so to speak. And that is definitely important, but it's only half of the battle, I would say. I would very strongly argue that knowing those skills, it's only half of your formation as a professionist. So along the same lines, I then ask you, what skills do you think employers value the most? Just a little break, by the way. Usually when I give these presentations face-to-face, I like to ask people other questions. I realize that online is a bit difficult, so you're gonna have to bear with me. It's gonna be me mostly speaking the entire time. So hopefully I will not bore you. But then, okay, so going back to the topic. So what are the skills that employers value the most? So I kind of Googled this. I grouped up from several different results, several different questions. The kind of skills that employees value the most. And they don't really have to do with learning the skills of your field. They have to do with something else entirely. So about being a good people person, being able to have written communications, adapting to different situations, being creative, having that mindset of growing, pushing forward, having solid work ethic, being a team player, being flexible, knowing how to manage your own time by yourself without the need of having a boss telling you what to do, having the ability to think critically and solve problems, not just because you learned step 1, 2, 3, but because you're able to apply what you learned. And I think out of all these, there are three that come to light under the current situation, which is tolerance for high stress situations, adaptability, and flexibility. I think those three above the rest are the most relevant at the moment. So how do these things relate? How do these soft skills? So what employees value the most is not, obviously you need to learn the skills of your field, of your trade, but what they value the most are the soft skills, which is why often when you look at job postings, you see skills needed such as being a good team player, or having the being able to take on complex problems, complex situations. If you're a salesman, having the flexibility to work 50 plus days a year and so on. So this is very commonly what you see when you go to a job posting. Obviously, there's an idea, we need an engineer with this and this knowledge, but the stress falls mostly on these soft skills. So they can be summarized as the 21st century, or not summarized. These are all put very nicely and classified into the 21st century skills, which is basically the skills and the learning dispositions required for people to succeed in the 21st century society and workplace. So like I told you, employers are shifting their focus from what can you do, what have you learned, and then they are focusing more on how fast can you learn, how fast can you do it. If you don't know one thing, how willing are you to learn it? And really, the pace of today's life has really forced companies into adopting this way of thinking. So the 21st century skills, obviously, as I told you, it's not something that I came up with. It's something that is very widely recognized out there, and it's backed up by some of the biggest players. There's a foundation by these companies and these stakeholders that really try to empower this norm and this skill set, bringing it to light and highlighting the importance of really this 21st century skills. And well, I'll give you a second. So these are the 21st century skills grouped up. There are some websites that mention them a bit differently, but they all come back to the same. So I'll give you a second to look at them. So the ones on the left side, so the learning skills, and the one in the middle, the life skills, I think you can guess what they are. They are pretty self-explanatory, right? But then the skills on the right, literacy skills, they don't mean they don't refer to the ability of knowing how to read and such. It refers mostly to how people perceive media, how you absorb information when you hear things, how you question the information you receive and not just take it as such, how easily you can adapt to new technologies for your own personal life and the workplace. The learning skills on the left, they teach students about the mental process required to adapt and improve in the work environment. And these are universal for any career, whether you're a psychologist or a chemical engineer or a designer or anything. And then the life skills are pretty much about a person's everyday life. So obviously into the workplace, but also part of a person being himself or herself. I will not focus much on literacy skills, but I will show you one example. I am a football person. I'm a big fan of football in general. And I will give you a clear example in today's environment. So for those of you who are not football fans, that right there is Dejan Lovren, a central defender for Liverpool. And he recently saw a posting on his, I believe it was his Instagram, kind of like agreeing with conspiracy theories that COVID-19 was just a cover-up for vaccinations to take over the world, take over the people, or something in that sense. And then very strongly attacking Bill Gates, probably the most celebrated philanthropist nowadays. So this is an example of media literacy. So probably this guy just read something, didn't really question it, and then started to becoming very loud about it. And why is this a problem? You're obviously entitled to your own opinion, but there's also the fact that and this will happen to everyone later on as when you go to the work life and you're representing a company, is that when you speak publicly in social media, for instance, you are not representing yourself, but you're also representing your brand, your employer. So in the instance of this guy, he's representing his club, and having such provocative statements is can be seen as can be frowned upon. So it's just an example of how media literacy can be definitely important. But as for the rest, I will show you some of those skills, and I will give you some examples on how companies either exploit the need for these skills or how they adopt them and make them part of their DNA. So as far as social skills, I will give you an example of WhatsApp and Pinterest, which I think they are very known to you. Both of these companies were actually founded in 2009, 2010. So during the Great Recession, so during a period of crisis when people would in general think that it's a time to start a company, at the time where even established companies were struggling. So these companies were started, and they basically capitalize on people's need to be social, regardless of what's going on. So, for instance, everyone knows WhatsApp as a messaging platform. One of the key elements, at least at the beginning, or how the founders envisioned it, was that aside from being a very cheap alternative to texting, it was a quick platform or a quick messaging platform where people could see your status, where people could see whether you're available or whether you're busy. And similar on Pinterest. So Pinterest pretty much, as any of the social media, capitalizes on people's need to be social. In their specific case, it's with people's motivation of showing what they like, of making their own paint boards and showing whether they like they have a hobby such as painting, where they can display their own art and such. But then I would like to bring you to a very nowadays topic. So Zoom, the very platform that we are using right now. I don't know, to me actually Zoom was not very known before this whole situation. I don't know if it's the case for several people as well. And the thing is that they are finding alternative uses to their tool, even if it's by mistake. Obviously, Zoom is being used nowadays a lot for work, whether it's companies, communications, for universities, for remote teaching, and so on. But I've even seen people have parties at their own place, separated, remote parties or dinners through Zoom, where several people sit around their own table, have their computer, and they're all being social. So people, regardless of the social distance and the limitations of going out and seeing other people still need to be social, and a company can either capitalize or just weather the storm, or just think like, okay, it's what it is. So there's always the opportunity to capitalize on what's out there. And moving on to the next skill, creativity. Creativity is very linked to innovation. So the ability to come up with something from scratch, maybe to come up with something new that did not exist, or putting existing elements together to form something that did not exist as such, and that most importantly brings value to people's lives, so that it makes people's lives better. But let's look at two types of innovation. So there's incremental innovation, where a company sort of iterates their own product, makes it a bit faster, a bit more powerful, more battery life, and so on. So there's nothing great going on, but there's just little bits of incremental innovation. Or you can see innovation as disruptive, or there is something that did not exist, and then just a company came out of the blue with something different. And let's look at two clear examples of that. So the razor blade, the brand Gillette probably known by everyone. It's a very typical example of incremental innovation, right? So the razor blade has pretty much remained the same in the last 100+ years. Yes, adding a little stripe that suits your skin, or adding more blades in order to get a better shape in one go. But it's pretty much the same product, right? It hasn't changed. Another example of incremental innovation, Coca-Cola. Slightly different flavors, maybe you have a variety with Coca-Cola and cherry flavor or vanilla, or you use new sweeteners to adapt with people's need or people's desire to lower their sugar intake. But it's still pretty much the same thing, just incremental innovation. But then let's look at a different type of innovation. So probably a company that's not known to everyone, the Dollar Shave Club. So the Dollar Shave Club came from the idea that if razor blades are the same, they haven't changed, why not innovate in having razor blades as a service? So Dollar Shave Club was a company that started a service of very cheaply getting razor blades to your home. You would not need to go to the store until your razor blade went blunt, but you would rather get very cheap razor blades. They probably didn't last very long, but you got a package enough to last you through the whole month. And then once those were done, you will get your next shipment of razor blades. And obviously the technology is the same. It's still the same old razor blade, even a worse version. But the innovation there came into packaging it as a service, using very cheap materials, very cheap razor blades, and bringing them home to you. And I would argue that they are successful, and a measure of that can be seen as the fact that there are many other companies who have imitated like this business model, who have been copying what these guys do. So innovation, like I told you, innovation doesn't have to be reinventing the wheel, but combining elements together. Well, creativity and startups, they always come hand in hand, right? So it's the reason why it's a startup who disrupted the music industry, or it's also a startup who disrupted the hospitality industry, and it's also a startup who disrupted the transportation industry. And well, for example, Airbnb was founded in 2008, in the midst of the Great Recession, of a crisis. So probably no one in the right mind would have thought in such a time like, hey, people still need to travel, right? How about we offer them a cheaper alternative for accommodation? And then it took off. Uber similarly was founded in 2009, so still during the recession, and still managed to become the unicorn it is today. Or Spotify, which was founded before the recession in 2006, but then still managed to weather the storm, to survive, and then thrive later on. So it's also a lesson that if you manage to survive those difficult times, then you are setting up yourself for success. So next skill, critical thinking. So critical thinking applies or is linked a lot with problem solving, right? So with the ability to take what you learn and not just apply directly, but to look at a problem, knowing how to dissect it, identifying the elements, and then figure out the necessary steps you need to take in order to solve that problem. And then coming up with your own approach, and not just looking to someone who's next to you and see how they did it, but actually solving the problem on your own. So this is the what critical thinking is, and which is very relevant. And I will not talk about this in examples. I will rather tell you to tune in later to Sergio's talk. He will be focusing a lot on problem solving in times of crisis. So he will do a much better job on describing this thing. Moving on to the next skill. So going on to flexibility. I will bring the example of Bank, which is a bank, and it's actually a neobank. A neobank is a bank that operates without any physical branches. So they carry on their business entirely online or through telephone. So an example of flexibility from Bunk is when they identified that people became more conscious of the environment, they very quickly came up with an alternative, or with an idea that for every 100 euros of money people would use through a Bunk card, they would plant a tree. And there are actually some studies how the use of Bunk card has managed to offset the carbon footprint significantly. So it's actually the amount of trees being planted has made a difference. It's a very flexible company that is pushing for cashless methods, following the trends. So not thinking about cash, but always going cashless. And last and very relevant, so they were very quick to react to the current pandemic, and they were able to very quickly increase the limit on contactless payments from 50 euros to 100 euros. So increasing the amount of purchases that you make, and diminishing the need for touching and such. And then moving on to the next. Talking about leadership, I will talk about Apple. I both like and dislike using Apple as an example. I dislike using Apple because it's a big cliche, or it's a very cliche. But I like using Apple because it's very teachable. It's very clear when you use Apple as an example. And many then might argue that Apple is not a startup, right? So rightfully so. Apple is one of the biggest corporations out there. It's actually, or it has the largest valuation of any company in the world. So not necessarily a startup as such, right? But Apple is a startup in the way they operate. So for instance, Google and Apple are perfect examples of massive corporations that operate as a startup. So they tend to take a lot of risks, come up with a lot of new products, a lot of which may fail. They embrace that failure into going after the next, very similar to how startups do. They might sometimes operate very lightly. So aside from being very rich, they might still operate with a lot of financial sense. So not just pouring money in, but looking to get the value out of itself. And sometimes they might even treat their products a bit independently. But Apple is the clearest example of leadership, right? So everyone knows Steve Jobs. And Apple is an example of how leadership can set a company apart. It has been dissected a lot. It has been talked a lot about Steve Jobs' way of working. It was very clear that he was not the nicest person to work with. Many said that he alienated people around him, but he was a leader. So he always challenged people to bring out their best, and that is leadership in its purest form. Those who share Steve Apple's vision, they went full in. They gave it their best. And while Apple was not founded in the middle of a crisis, they were founded in the mid-70s, so not a period of crisis. Their rebirth did actually happen during a moment of crisis. So if you think about Apple going towards the late 90s, they were widely surpassed by Microsoft as a tech company, as a computing company. But in the 2000s, the early 2000s, saw the rebirth of Apple. And it was actually during the dot-com bubble. So during the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a very large financial bubble that originated from the internet era. So there was a lot of speculation in the markets of what is all this e-commerce and all these companies coming out of nowhere and inflating and such. And in the early 2000s, there was a bubble. There were a lot of companies that disappeared. Even large massive companies such as Cisco nearly disappeared. And it was actually during that time that Apple began the rebirth, started their path to become the company they are today. And it was, for instance, during those times that they launched their very first iPod, which I would say managed or which revolutionized, redefined portable music. It was around the same time, a bit before that, that they came up with their very first iMac. And the iMac, the importance of the iMac is that it, in a way, it redefined how computers are seen. At that point, computers stopped being seen as just efficiency machines, and they were seen as something that would complement people. They could be seen as objects of beauty and objects that could be intuitive. So it was during a time of crisis that Apple really launched themselves forward. Talking about collaboration as a 21st century skill, I would like to bring an example of Slack. I think everyone knows this working tool. Slack actually did not start as a communications and collaboration company. It was actually a gaming startup. It was a startup. It went by a different name. I can't remember that right now what it was. But they were actually a gaming company, and it was a gaming company with quite a bit of expectations on them. They have managed to raise several millions in funding, and they had a game which they launched, and then they pulled back and did not manage to get enough traction. They were at the end of the line. Pretty much, the investors have lost faith in the product, not in the company, but they have lost faith in the product. But then what happened is that the group was very geographically distributed. So they have people working all over the globe. And as part of their tools, they found out that there wasn't any tool out there that allowed them to work efficiently at a distance and collaborate. So they decided to create their own tool. And they used this tool internally while they were working on their games. And eventually they realized that this tool would actually be the moneymaker. That's when Slack as such was born. And even though there was no funding left, the investors had faith in the team. They knew that the product was different, but they had faith in the team, and that's how they managed to push forward. So the same investors came along and then gave the Slack people the lift they needed. And again, it just so happens that Slack was founded during 2008. So again, right in the midst of the Great Recession, of a great economic crisis. And okay, I think I'm just checking how I'm doing on time. Sorry, but talking about Slack, this gives me like the perfect example to tell you about startups in general. So you can think of a startup as a technology company that comes up with a fancy new product or service, usually very technology intensive. They have an idea. They think they have identified a problem, and they have identified how to solve this problem. So they go after users. They try to get some traction. If they are successful, they attract a lot of investment. So you would say that's problem solved, right? You have a startup, you have some users, and then you got $5 million investment. So you're good to go. Actually, quite the opposite. That's when problems intensify. They continue. They get larger. Usually, in the world of startups, they speak of runway, of how much runway they have left, and this equals to basically how much longer they can survive. A startup is a business that gets investment, and then they are looking for a scalable business model. They are looking for the way to bring in money in a constant manner. So they might have a few users, not enough to maintain them. They have investment, and they just burn through that investment. So that is why they talk about this runway. So we have a 10-month runway, a 12-month runway, and to be honest, this is in itself a bit of a crisis. This is how startups operate on every day. So the way startups work is pretty much a crisis after another. And similarly, on that note, I will not tell you more about this topic because I really ask you to come back tomorrow to the session where Irmolo Nasma will be talking about exactly this, how crises are just everyday business for startups. I think you'll have the link. Really recommend you that you come back tomorrow. Irma will talk to you about this topic, and he will give examples, very particular examples about his current startup. He's a serial entrepreneur involved in many startups, and he will discuss his current startup and how he has used this current pandemic to get more business, how they have managed to push forward and even utilize it as an advantage. But from my side, that's all from me. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you managed to follow me all the way through the end. And if you have any questions or any comments or anything that comes to your mind, please don't be shy. Whether you would like to ask, use your own voice or write it in the chat. I'm here to have a conversation. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Raúl. And then, so dear listeners, feel free to ask the questions or write them in the chat. We will be happy to continue discussion on so important thing. Just from my part, while others are thinking, so you outlined that ability to cope with the stressful situations, which are usual when you start a business. There are so many unknown things. What else is like top 3 or something like top things that are very important, and how we could work on that in order to improve these skills as newcomers or those who want to jump into the startups ecosystem?
Okay, very good question. If I would see the ability to deal with stress, obviously, I would also highlight the ability to cope with failure. So failure is a part of everyday life, whether it's school or work. And when you fail, you can either take things negatively and look for excuses or point the finger at someone else, or you could learn, see what you did wrong and how you make sure that this doesn't happen again. The ability to deal with uncertainty, I would say, is also very, very important. Whether it's your own business, whether you're working in a large company. And as to how would I recommend that people practice this, to be honest, or I wish that someone would have told me that you should, during your studies, try to do as much as you can, and not just focus on your school credits, on your courses, but try to get as much experience. The period as a university student is one of those times where you have the chance to make the most out of everything, to try several different things. Whether it's taking an internship or putting your studies on hold for a short while and getting some actual job experience in your field or such. And I would also recommend, or one thing that I always like to highlight is obviously startups, because we're an incubator. It doesn't mean that I tell people like, hey, you should become an entrepreneur. Be an entrepreneur. Be an entrepreneur. You should become an entrepreneur. But it's mostly about putting yourself in the way with startups, with entrepreneurs. If you want to be an employee at a large corporate, if that is your dream job, then that is absolutely fine. You should do everything in order to achieve that goal. But I would recommend you to also look at other alternatives while you get there. Working for a startup, working for a small company, might teach you or will teach you skills that you would otherwise not learn at a large corporation, and skills that are actually appreciated in large corporations.
Krister, please unmute your microphone. Sorry.
Okay, but that's pretty much it on that topic.
Okay, thank you very much. So please, next questions, feel free, or the comments or your opinion or experiences, feel free to share. We have quite a big audience, something like close to like 43 now. We were 44. So is there someone who can share the story or something that you found out, what kind of skills are important for you right now, either missing or that worked very well for you from your this time of during last month?
Come on, people, don't be shy. We will not judge.
Yeah, communication skills are one of the skills that are needed too.
Right, and being able to talk to people online, it might be uncomfortable, but also important skill. So ask away or feel free to comment.
Okay, again, while we are waiting the rest of the questions, just my own interest is what changed during this month in the work of the incubators, meaning not just technically that you worked from the home and everything was online, but what else changed? Were there some other additional challenges that that occurred because of this this COVID isolations and everything, between how incubator works and how startups are working and what kind of help they are needing? Was there something that changed or not, or everything was just online usual?
Well, communication obviously, and then the ability to organize these online sessions out of the blue and still do it in a way that brings value to them. And then kind of being or making sure the startups know that we are there present. Currently, our startup activities, our incubator as such, doesn't work as a typical 6-8 week program. Rather, we work with startups on a case basis according to needs. So there is obviously the need to let them know that we're still here. Because obviously the startups have gone into survival mode, so they are just focusing on the most vital elements, and so just making sure that they know that we are present and that we can help.
And we do see here a comment from Yuka that also a strict methodology like the lean startup is a tool that can help you to cope with the stress by systematic in the mindset of the cows. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the lean startup methodology. So the very essence of the lean startup is like this cycle of build, measure, learn. So if you have an idea, business, product, anything, you build something very quickly in order to show it to people. You don't build a product, you build an MVP, sort of, let's not go into the terminology, so a sort of prototype. You show it to people, you gather their feedback, and then you learn, and then you do it again. So adopting this way of work can definitely be important in times like this. Whether it's school, work, anything else, having like this very agile way of working on just focusing on the essentials and not wasting time on any extra features, but knowing what the essential should be, and then focusing on that and going into this cycle. I think it's obviously something very important, very relevant to everyone in general, not just typical technology startups.
So there is one question. You see, Raúl?
Ways to improve creativity. Wow. Good question. Uh, I would say how would I put it? The idea with creativity or innovation is to kind of like aim big. So like when I was talking about incremental or disruptive innovation, uh, you should always look at solving problems. So the way of being creative, or one way of being creative, I would argue, there's obviously more ways than one, could be looking at people's problems, not thinking, okay, I think I'm gonna create something, I'm gonna build something just because I can, but it's rather saying, identifying if people in general have problems, and then how can you solve them? How can you create something new? That could probably be a way to increase creativity. Uh, and then obviously there are other tools. If you mean for like everyday creativity, then there are different ways of brainstorming, or there are different activities to brainstorm, and different techniques for brainstorming. And this could also be like boost your creativity when it comes to like everyday things. And this is stuff that you could Google. So if you have, for instance, a school project, and you're kind of stuck, or you have a sort of project where you're creating some sort of product, you can always look at different ways of brainstorming, different techniques to help you kind of like bring you out of like your everyday way of working. Uh, Building things would be a way also to boost creativity. Just getting out a set of Legos and building random stuff, even if you're not the person that tends to be very crafty or creative, but like putting yourself into these environments that kind of challenge you could also be a way of boosting creativity. Depends on for what kind of use cases. But just to mention a few.
Yes, and there was Yuka's comment about doing different things and do all things indifferently. Yeah, so this certain different way to look at the things. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I would like to ask a question.
Yes.
So I have a question about the communication skills. How to overcome fear of talking to influential people, like important people.
Good question. Because I would probably say that I used to have like this kind of fear, and I think the way to look at it is that you look at them. I mean, these are just tips. It's not a rule, but look at it as you are just talking to people. Try to put the big titles aside for a moment, and do be very aware that if you're talking to a influential or very busy person, is that they don't have time to they don't have a lot of time for small talk. So they look to engage with people who bring value. Uh, but also so making sure that you're bringing something to the table. But other than that, it's just a thing of confidence of kind of like shaking off. If you have any fear, just shake it off and okay, I'm gonna talk to this massive business owner, but still, it's just gonna be two people talking.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
No problem.
I also have a question.
Yep.
Maybe I missed this, but why do you think it is that these big companies emerge in specifically in the times of crisis? Like, for example, Uber. It's not like people needed to like Uber more when there was crisis. So maybe you have some explanation for this.
Well, they probably identified there was a big problem in mobility, right? Or the taxi industry as such wasn't providing the best service. So I think they identified that by integrating technology uh, in a way that no one had done it before would probably be beneficial. And I'm betting that there was a lot of back and forth and a lot of trying, a lot of testing, as I told you, that startups usually operate. But that is the thing with startups. A lot of the times they do things that might seem counterintuitive, but having this, and especially as you mentioned, like in a time of crisis, would people need to move? Well, they still do need to move. If you can provide a better service or a cheaper service, then you might have a fighting chance. but again, what I think happened is that they probably identified this need. Right? I don't know the particular history behind how Uber started, but I'm willing to bet that there was a lot of identifying a problem and then just looking at different ways how to solve it.
Yeah, okay. So it's like the first step, identifying some kind of problem, and probably in crisis situations, a lot of problems arise that you can identify.
And, yeah, arise or can be exacerbated. It used to be a problem, but then during time of crisis, it becomes even a bigger issue.
Yeah. Okay,
So for instance, in the same note, so for instance, if you think at Airbnb, so being born also during time of crisis, people would not have the expendable income to travel and stay at hotels, right? So maybe they thought like, oh, what about if we offer this to people? Cheaper way to travel or allow them to travel by offering cheaper accommodation, then it could be a possibility. And well, the story behind Airbnb, I'm not gonna waste your time with it, but it was also kind of born out of need to raise money, and these people decided to rent their own room or rent an air mattress in their own room just to make some extra money, and then it took up from there. They identified a big problem or a big gap by chance.
Yes, so then now the last chance for those who had some question inside, but we are not sure to ask or not. So now it's your chance to do that.
Speak now or forever hold your silence. And by the way, in the chat, Yuka posted an article of how to boost your creativity, and backed by science. So. Okay, but no more questions or comments. So, Christine, what do you think?
Yes, if there are none of the questions or the comments, unless there's something that you want the guys to add in the chat, feel free to do that. So you don't need to be afraid to speak aloud in front of the very important audience, Raúl. But still use the last minutes if there's something that you want to ask that could be related to the subject that we are talking about right now, or that could be related to something else that relates to the incubators or the startup ecosystem, as we have a speaker who is from the field. So if there is something that things you think that could be of interest for you, just personally, use the possibility to ask that.
All right.
Yeah, probably then, Raúl, some wishes for the new or current startups who are listening, or the future startups.
Yeah. No, just well, thank you first and foremost. Thank you very much for tuning in and listening. Hopefully, you appreciated what I said, and like I told you, you don't have to take to heart every single word that I said. Just wanted to give you some of my my own perspective. And for those of you out there thinking of a life as an entrepreneur, then definitely it's always an alternative, a lifestyle. Those of you who don't want to be an entrepreneur, don't kind of close that door entirely. Think of it as ways of exploring your life as a professionist and in many other different aspects. So don't think of your work life in a linear way, that you want to graduate and have a big job and that's it. Think of it as a way of exploring different alternatives, and never closing door on any of them. But other than that, thank you very much. I hope that you have a a good session or a good couple of days, and next week as well. Do try to get the most out of every speaker and what they tell you, they share with you. And obviously, and most importantly, when it comes to power, and once we are able to resume business as usual, because also the pandemic has had an impact on us and being able to offer internships and so on. But once these things take off, do really consider this type of internships as something not that you have to do just to get school credits or just because you have to, but as a way to get very valuable and relevant work experience in an environment very different to yours, in a different country, in a very fast-paced environment in a startup. So I do really recommend that you go after those possibilities.
Mm-hmm. And here's just one question: how often is pitching a part of the startup's lifestyle?
Always. It's as a startup is always pitching and selling and explaining. So it's part of the bread and butter, and it's something that you learn how to do because you have to. And obviously, you can get a lot of help with pitching and how to prepare a pitch and how to come across nicely when you're talking in front of an audience or a few people or a company or an investor and so on. But definitely, pitching is a part of almost the everyday life of a startup entrepreneur. Tips for okay, just a second. Specific tips for tricks to entering an already saturated market or more that is dominated by a few large firms. Well, I would first argue from the point of a startup, if you're entering a saturated market, is that the right market for you? Because as a startup, you don't have the money to compete with a large company or with those corporates if you're offering the same. So you have to offer something else. There has to be an added value to what you do. There has to be, again, like I said, there always has to be a problem that a person has or a large, preferably a large group of persons have, and then being able to solve it. If it's a saturated market, then might not be ideal. But then again, for instance, if you look at transportation, it was a saturated market, and then you see how Uber did it. They offer something different. They offer a technology option to everyday transportation. So they didn't do the exact same thing everyone was doing. So they didn't offer just come on taxis, or they didn't offer your typical bus rides. They offered something else, something entirely. They disrupted the industry by flipping it. So entering a saturated market, then you have to make sure that you are not just offering the exact same thing.
And there was a joke by Yuka. How do you know that entrepreneur is pitching? Her lips are moving. So that means you are pitching all the time inside the pitching speech. Yeah. Okay, then. Thank you very much for your answers. I think that that always helps, because there are so many things that we need to know, we need to test, we need to try, and we want to get as much as possible information in advance too. So then for those who are listening right now, at the beginning of the conversation in the chat.
Yeah. By the way, good remark from Yuka.
Yeah, learning and listening is important. Yeah, sure. So there is a link for the SurveyMonkey in case someone didn't register with the name and the last name for this webinar. In order, if you need the certificate, then you just in the SurveyMonkey link you add your name and the university or some other institution you represent. But otherwise, we will be very happy to talk again after half an hour when we have the next session. The next session on the problem solving in times of the crisis. So that will be, I think, again, the opportunity for all of us to get the information for the current situation that will be of value. Okay, then thank you, Raúl, and wishing all the best.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for listening
Thank you.
and the questions.
Thank you,
Thank you
Jukka.
very much.